On today's Locked On Jayhawks, our biggest takeaways from KU's 28-point win over Houston is Jalon Daniels back?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
I'm Derek Johnson. Thanks for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And on today's edition of Locked On Jayhawks, we're getting to our three biggest takeaways from KU's 42-14 victory over the Houston Cougars on Saturday. We'll also get to our top and bottom performers according to Pro Football Focus, maybe some snap counts, some interesting numbers from PFF about what it can tell us for the game and this KU football team. Before we get into any of that action, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Place your first $5 bet. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. Okay, so Kansas takes down Houston 42-14. Biggest takeaways from the performance for KU, or really last week for KU. Let's start with our number one biggest takeaway. And I asked the question at the start, is Jalon Daniels back? If you were just viewing it from a lens of the last 2 weeks, the answer would be yes. I'm not going to quite declare it, but here's what I am going to declare. I am going to declare that I am really close to saying it. The reason that is going to hold me off is that you're playing at Kansas State on Saturday. And furthermore, you're playing 3 consecutive ranked opponents. So it would be very easy for me to sit here today and say the guy that we saw on Saturday was the guy that we saw in 2022, was the guy that we saw in 2023, and say he is back, baby, right? And now this back-to-back performances that have been good performances, with that one being an outstanding performance. And so from that perspective, it would be easy to say he's back, right? And the reasons would be that it just took a little bit into the season to shake the rust off, and you're coming off the bye week, and so that was further the opportunity, I guess, to shake the rust off and get more connected with your offensive coordinator and play caller in Jeff Grimes. And you're starting to see him hit more targets, right? You see Jared Casey have 2 touchdowns. You see LJ Arnold and Quentin Skinner getting involved as opposed to it mostly being Luke Grimm. You see the running backs getting involved out of the backfield as receivers. There's a lot of reasons to think this is true. But the reason I want to wait on this is because what happens if, 3 straight ranked opponents, it looks like it did the first part of the season, because you can very easily do that. It's not just you're playing 3 straight ranked opponents, that you're playing 3 straight good defenses with Kansas State, Iowa State, although Kansas State a little bit better, much better, I should say, against the run than they are the pass. But Iowa State, which is an elite defense, and BYU, which has been a tough physical defense at this point in time. So here's what my, I guess, takeaway, if we want to put it on like a headliner in a sentence. Jalon Daniels is a good game against Kansas State for me declaring he is fully back. So here's Jalon's games according to total QBR, which is the ESPN metric. It's on a scale of 0 to 100, and it basically looks at, right, like it's different than quarterback ratings, different than total QBR. Total QBR is going to take into account, if it's 3rd down and 10 and you complete a pass for 7 yards, it's not going to give you a big positive. Versus if it's 1st and 10 and you complete a pass for 7 yards, like that's a positive, right? And those situations do matter when you're down, or 4th quarter, like those things matter. So basically it's been termed this way, that based on that performance, based on the total QBR grade you have, your team will win the game X amount of the time. So if your total QBR is 50, your team's going to win about 50% of the time based on that quarterback performance, meaning it pretty much is just going to come down to how everything else around you goes. So here were his performances by total QBR through the first 5 games of the season. 49 against Lindenwood, then 33, then 51, then 39, then 38. Those are not great numbers. But the last 2 weeks against Arizona State, the last 2 games, I should say, 82 total QBR against Arizona State, and against Houston, it was a 96 total QBR. That total QBR against Houston, it was Jalon's highest rated game since he had like a 98 against Duke in the 2022 season. And yes, you can sit here and say, okay, what's the big whoop? Houston's a 2-win team, like blah, blah, blah. you can say what you want about Houston overall, that they're not a great team, because they're not, but that is a good defense. Like coming in, we talked about it. We looked at the stats. They were, top 5 in the conference in terms of the defensive side of the football. And some of their success rate stuff was like top 25 in the country. So you showed it against what actually is a pretty good defense in Houston. And now that's back-to-back weeks where it's looked really good. And like I said, it's not just the stats, it's the eye test. You saw it with some of the throws downfield that he had. You saw it with some of the, taking risks on 50-50 balls to Quentin Skinner on the touchdown. But we saw some of those 50-50 ball risks against Illinois turn into interceptions because they were underthrown. Gave him a better chance in this one. The one that I pointed out in the recap show that was vintage Jalon to me was the one where he ends up rolling to the off side of his so to his left, the offhand side, I should say, and throws a dart kind of to the sideline, coming back, curling back to the ball to Trevor Wilson, who makes a nice catch at the sideline and gets his feet inbounds. Like, that was really impressive for what Jalon did. And so the eye test kind of backed it up. And obviously the key to being back, and further reason why, beyond the ranked opponents thing where it could easily, fall back off, is that it is, I guess, the key to being, what Jalon was or what Jalon might be again, isn't just can you show it in a flash, it's can you be consistent at it, right? At this level of the collegiate level, the pro level, whatever you want to look at, like, anybody is capable of having one good game, or I guess most players are capable of having one good game. What separates the best players is that they can consistently have those good games. So like you go back to 2022, Jalon had a total QBR above 70 in 7 of his 9 games. Consistency there, right? You look at the 2023 season, all 3 of his games in 2023, he had a total QBR above a 70. So that's consistency. You've now seen it in back-to-back weeks. Can you get it for a third straight week with the Kansas State game against a good defense? Again, they're better against the run than they are against the pass, but still overall good defense that will mix things up, that is going to be complex, complicated in how they go about you. And furthermore, like, what happens if you don't have a 96 pass blocking grade in front of you like they had this past game, which you're probably not going to have because you're playing against some of these good defenses like K-State and Iowa State and BYU. So bottom line, if Jalon Daniels has another strong performance this Saturday against Kansas State, I'm ready to say he's back. All right, let's get to takeaways number 2, takeaways number 3 in a moment on Locked On Jayhawks. Our episode today is brought to you by Roy, and it's time to recognize our Roy Player of the Week. So far this season, we've pulled over $10,000 to support players on Roy. Micro deposits lead to massive change. With the Roy app, you can direct your support to the athletes you love, ensuring that all funds go to the specific player you choose. Unlike collectives, you know exactly where your support is going, and you even receive exclusive content like personal videos and updates after the season. The best part, it's risk-free. If the athlete decides to transfer or doesn't deliver the content, you get your money back. This week, I am supporting Cobee Bryant. Easy one, right? 3 interceptions for Cobee Bryant. So I pitched in $100 with Roy, and you can join me as well. Even just $10 makes a difference. Let's show Cobee Bryant that love for sticking around with KU, having all these great Big 12 seasons, and keep him connected to KU. Remember, pay today, celebrate tomorrow. Your support sets your team up for success. Plus, don't miss out on Roy's exciting giveaway. Win 2 tickets to a game in November. Just download Roy, create an account, and enter referral code Locked On, and you're entered. Already on Roy, any contribution to an athlete's campaign also gets you entered automatically. No purchase necessary, void where prohibited. Download Roy today and join the NIL game with no subscriptions and no fees. Be sure to check us out on Instagram, Facebook, and X at Roy_return on you for more info. Roy, support the players, change the game. That is Roy. On to our second and third takeaways from the KU game. Let's get to number 2. Brian Borland adjusted, and he was rewarded. I think a fair criticism that you could have in a lot of games or a lot of, overall seasons for KU and, with Brian Borland has been that maybe they haven't adjusted enough. Maybe they haven't made those in-game adjustments fast enough, or that at times they've been too passive. And I think they came out of the bye week as the aggressor in this football game. And you saw it in the stat sheet. When you saw Kansas, it felt like they were blitzing more often in this game. I actually have some numbers on that to kind of back that up, so we'll get to that in a second. But Kansas wound up with 6 sacks. They wound up with 12 tackles for loss. They wound up with 4 interceptions. They wound up with 17 pressures. You would take any of those numbers in any specific game. Probably would like the pressures to be even higher than that, to be completely honest, around 20. But when you're working with a crop where Kansas has not been a great pass rushing team, you have to manufacture it some way. So, like, out of comparison, the Arizona State and the TCU games, so your 2 previous games, you had 19 total pressures in the 2 games combined. You had 17 pressures in this game, and then 6 sacks, 12 TFLs, 4 interceptions. The crazy thing is KU was only graded a 58 in pass rush in this game, according to Pro Football Focus. So is that just a misstep by PFF? Possible. It's also possible that it tells me something else. It tells me that the individual pass rush wasn't much better from where it's been in past games. It tells me that when you were rushing 3-4 guys, your standard rushes, that you still weren't really winning, much more or at a higher rate than you had been on the season. The reason that you just got all sorts of chaotic plays and pressures and sacks is because you brought extra players. And so, you're not going to, if you bring 7 blitzers, there's only so many guys that are blocking. Or if you bring 6 blitzers, there's only so many guys that are blocking. So, they're not going to get a negative pass blocking grade if one guy goes unblocked to the quarterback because, the other 5 were being blocked by 5 guys, right? What do you want them to do? Do you want the left tackle to duplicate and become 2 players? You can't. And the same goes on the other side. I don't know that that's going to boost your pass rush grade if you just have a guy running free because he was unblocked. Technically, that doesn't go down as an awesome play for PFF. I believe that would be the case in their scoring system. So that, to me, is why the pass rush grade, despite the fact that the production, the sacks, were elite in that game for KU, why the pass rush grade doesn't necessarily echo that you were blitzing more. And then if we dive into Pro Football Focus snap counts, this is what backs this up. Which, again, just I think for a lot of people watching, you would sit there and say, yeah, I felt like they blitzed more. Well, again, here's the numbers. KU got 24 pass rush snaps from non-defensive linemen. So from Cornell Wheeler, Taiwan Berryhill, JB Brown, Marvin Grant, right? Non-defensive linemen, KU got 24 pass rush snaps from those players in this game. If we go back to the Arizona State game, KU got just 8 snaps from non-defensive linemen rushing the passer, including just 1 from JB Brown in the Arizona State game. He had 6 against Houston, so a lot more. Now, I would imagine in the Arizona State game, probably a little bit harder to pass rush JB Brown as much because, with Cornell Wheeler out for the Arizona State game, it's you have 1 less. You need JB Brown to be more of a traditional linebacker, maybe, because Wheeler's out. I don't know. That would just be my assumption. But overall, before the Houston game, so the first 6 games of the season, KU averaged 12 non-defensive line pass rush snaps per game, meaning against Houston, they doubled their average. And it was an awesome game for the defense overall. It was creating pressure when you don't have an Austin Booker on your team. I think the fact that KU maybe was a little bit more passive made more sense on last year's team when you had Austin Booker. Although, given the corners that KU has, you probably still do want to be aggressive with those guys. But on this year's team, you almost have to say, hey, we're going to be aggressive. And now the question becomes if this was just because of the bye week or just because who they were playing, given the matchup against Houston, where you thought that they weren't a great throwing football team. So you wanted to blitz to, stop the run and tackle the quarterback before he scrambled away. Are you going to continue that? I think they should, because you look at K-State, they have an elite running game. Keep it going, try to stop the run. And yeah, they'll probably beat you on a couple big plays because you're being more risky. But I'd rather them beat you on a couple of big plays, but you make some big plays back, as opposed to just getting carved up all game like the TCU game, even though they did have a couple interceptions in that one. All right, our third and final takeaway here. Even with a win, KU's bad start to the season is still going to make things tougher on the recruiting trail. So this wasn't necessarily specific to Saturday, but over the weekend, JuJu Marks decommitted and flipped to Nebraska. So Marks is 6'6", 290-pound offensive tackle. He was a top 400 recruit nationally on the 24/7 composite. 3-star on just the 24/7 grades, but still an 89. Most of that, I think, is potential. This is a guy who, at 6'6", 290, clearly has the frame to be a power 5, or power 4, whatever, offensive lineman. A player who, first he was going to be a D lineman, now offensive lineman. Most of that is potential. I do think that it definitely could be a situation where, JuJu Marks ends up not providing much on the field wherever he goes to college. But also, I remember there were some questions about the on-field production of like Calvin Clements necessarily, but Calvin Clements had the projectable body, ended up coming to KU, and they coached him up, and seems like he's going to have a very promising career for KU. So it's possible that would happen to JuJu Marks. That said, I do think Calvin Clements was probably known, if you look at some of the scouting report stuff, for having high motor, being a highly intelligent player. Whereas with JuJu Marks, I don't know that motor has been in the strengths column for him. So I don't know. Maybe that's a different there. But like, point being, there's a high potential in-state kid, and that was part of it, the in-state part of it that really resonated. That could it help you with other players? I don't know. But at the moment, KU currently ranks 15th of 16 teams in recruiting ranking. Even if you go by average ranking, because maybe KU doesn't have as many commits as the other teams because they're going to leave spots open for the portal, they're still just 14th. KU's never going to be, an elite recruiting team. And for Lance Leipold, it always is just kind of about development and finding the diamonds in the rough. And that is always going to be what's more important. But you'd like to be a little bit higher than one of the bottom 3 or bottom 2 in the conference. So are there going to be others? Are there going to be other players decommitting? One of their tight end commits already was visiting like Mississippi State, even though he's committed to KU. So kind of becomes interesting. And it certainly doesn't make it easier to keep guys committed or to add new high school players. How does this affect your portal ability in the offseason? And so that's why, even if you don't reach your lofty goals of winning the Big 12 or competing for the Big 12 title, which they're not at this point, it's still important to win more games. It's still important to build more momentum and not just completely bottom out, because it does matter from the recruiting perspective. It's not the NFL where, once you miss out on the playoffs, it's like, oh no, just, lose the rest of your games, get a higher draft pick. You don't get a higher draft pick. You need to keep winning. That is one of the positives and negatives of college football, that, the worst teams aren't really rewarded. It's tougher to get off the mat. But the positive of that is it makes it so that even if, you are having a bad season, you still do have stuff to play for. And that recruiting is certainly one of them. So that'll be something to keep an eye on there. Let's get to our top and bottom PFF performers in the KU Houston game. This is Locked On Jayhawks. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You can get in on Kansas State. KU getting about 10 points right now. The line's been fluctuating a lot since it opened up a little bit early on. You can get some player props later in the week. Also, NBA is back tonight. They got some cool promos going on over at FanDuel, including one where if you bet like $5, you get 3 months free of NBA League Pass. So that's fun. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So that's at FanDuel.com, the official sportsbook partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Let's get to the top and bottom performers according to Pro Football Focus in the KU Houston game. Top 5 for the offense, Jalon Daniels. We talked about him having that good game. He was a 91 according to PFF in this one. So big game for him. Savion Morrison, only 8 snaps, but props to him. He had a 83 grade, so balled out in the limited numbers. And he might become more important this week. Daniel Highshaw sounds like he's going to be questionable for the K-State game. You would really miss that physical running ability that he brings to spell Devin Neal, but maybe that means more of a load for Savion Morrison, and maybe he could, step up. I'd imagine it might just mean like 25 carries for Devin Neal, but still some snaps for Savion Morrison. Lawrence Arnold was 3rd. He had a 79.5 grade. Cole Ballard was 4th. That's in 5 snaps and just like handed the ball off. So I'd imagine that's more of just a default grade. Quentin Skinner at a 69 was tied 4th. And then the next one would be Jared Casey, who had a 67. Your highest graded offensive lineman was Logan Brown, who had a 66. He had an 87 in pass blocking. That's what's interesting in this one. The pass blocking, as I mentioned, was like a 96 for KU. Brown was at an 87. Michael Ford and Kobe Baines were at 79s. Bryce Foster, 77. Devin Neal, a 76. Bryce Cabledew and Daniel Highshaw were both above 70. But the run blocking, nobody was above a 64 in run blocking for KU in this game. And actually your 2 highest graded run blockers and 3 of your top 4 were receivers, LJ Arnold, Quentin Skinner, Luke Grimm. So they did a good job blocking in this game. As far as the bottom 5 offensive players for KU per PFF, Tavita Noah had just a 44. He was a 46 in run blocking, which were 11 of his 16 snaps. So that's why. Daryl Simmons played just 5 snaps. He had a 51 grade. He had a penalty. I mean, when you have a penalty in 5 snaps, that's going to tank your grade. So small sample size, wouldn't put too much into that one. Leighton Cure, same kind of thing, just 6 snaps for him. He had a 55 grade. Bryce Cabledew was near the bottom. He actually had a 70.5 pass block grade, though. It's because he had a 57 run block grade, but KU overall did a good enough job running the football that, I don't know, I don't think that was probably deserving of a 56 grade for Bryce Cabledew. And same goes for Cobee Baines, who had a 57 grade, but like 79 in pass blocking, and again, 58 in run blocking, but KU did well run blocking, running the football against a Houston team who had a good run defense coming in. So again, I don't know that I'm buying that number on Cobee Baines. As far as the snap count stuff, we got to see a little bit of some of the young guys, like Calvin Clements got 5 snaps. Mentioned Cole Ballard played. Nolan Gorchika played a handful of snaps. That was the beauty of getting the big win there. We did get to see double-digit snaps for Trevor Wilson in this one. I thought it was interesting. Trevor Cardell and Jared Casey played close to equal snaps. We hadn't really been seeing that. Casey was at 34. Cardell was at 32. And as far as the defensive side of the football for KU, their highest-rated defender was, you'll be shocked by this one, the guy who had 3 interceptions with Cobee Bryant. He had an 84 defensive grade. He also had an 84 coverage grade. He was targeted 6 times, had 3 interceptions and a pass breakup. That's pretty good work for Cobee Bryant. Second was Dean Miller. He had 4 pressures in the game for KU and a 72 overall grade. Third was Dylan Downing. Small sample size, but cool to see walk-on coming in and playing well, and that's sample, 72 grade. Fourth, JB Brown. He was an animal all game long, 71 overall grade. But I'm looking at 83 in run defense, 83.5 in tackling, 69 in pass rush. He got a 54 in pass coverage, which was 24 snaps. Again, just pass rush him even more. Why not? Mello Dotson was 5th. So when you have 2 corners who are in your top 5, that's going to be a good thing for the pass defense. He had a 69 overall grade. And interesting in this one was that, for most games, teams target Mello Dotson and not Cobee Bryant. Houston tried Cobee Bryant and not really Mello. Mello only had 1 target against him. But they found out what happens when you target Cobee Bryant because he had the 3 interceptions in that game. As far as the tackling grade, J.B. Brown had the best grade. Marvin Grant was 2nd. Cornell Wheeler was 3rd. So nice to see him back. Coverage grade, Cobee was 1st. Jeremy Robinson had 1 coverage snap. He was 2nd. Mello was 3rd. How about Taiwan Berryhill? He was 4th. This was, okay. Let's get to the bottom grades here. So Jason Gilliam was at the bottom, 19 snaps, 51 grade. Second to last with Taiwan Berryhill. I will say this, though. Not a great game overall, 57 grade for Taiwan Berryhill, but he had a 66 coverage grade, and a 57 is one of his better performances of the season. In fact, it's his best of the last 3 games. So still not bad. Then you look at Caleb Taylor having a 57 and 26 snaps, DJ Warner at a 58 and 25 snaps as he continues to get more time. Taylor Davis had to fill in as the starting safety, ended up with 42 snaps at a 58.5 coverage grade, which, considering what he was vaulted into with basically 3 safeties in front of him on the depth chart out, all things pretty good for him. But Miller had 4 pressures. J.B. Brown had 3. Davis and Withers each had 2. So Davis can be kind of a pass rusher around the edge too. As far as missed tackles, only 1 guy missed 2. So that was good to see with Jason Gilliam. KU only missed 7 tackles in this game. That's a good number to be at. You got to be able to do that against K-State in this game. And then as far as the snap counts of note for KU, as you're looking down, Taiwan Berryhill still had 51 snaps in this game. J.B. Brown had 47. Cornell Wheeler had 25. I would imagine after getting him integrated a little bit more with Wheeler back in the action, K-State up this weekend, wouldn't be shocked if Berryhill and Wheeler are swapped this week, or at the very least, it comes a little bit closer together. We'll see what happens at that safety position. We also got to see Caleb Purdy for 26 snaps. I did mention him that I noticed it looked like he was the one who gave up that wheel route touchdown, and then he had a penalty on him later. He graded actually pretty okay on PFF, 66 overall grade, 74 tackling. It did not credit him with being the one who gave up that touchdown, though. I don't know who got credit for that. So if it would have been his mistake, then I don't know how that would have affected the grade, but I don't know who they necessarily dinged that one on, to say the least. Also, we saw Bai Jobe for 11 snaps, and he ended up with a pressure, so some interesting ones to keep an eye on there. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. We'll be back tomorrow. We're going to have a KU basketball season preview, the beginner's guide to the 2024-25 season. Don't miss it. Make sure you're subscribed right here with Locked On Jayhawks. See you then.